The morning of October 15th began like countless others at Gatcombe Park, Princess Anne's beloved Gloucestershire estate. The autumn air carried the crisp promise of winter, and the Princess Royal moved through her established routine with the precision that had defined her 63 years of unwavering service to the crown. At precisely 5:30 a.m., her personal protection officer noted her emerging from the main house, dressed in her familiar tweed jacket and Wellington boots, ready for her customary inspection of the estate's extensive grounds. Anne had always found solace in these early morning walks. Unlike the carefully choreographed public appearances that filled her days, an average of 500 official engagements annually making her one of the busiest working royals, these moments belonged entirely to her. She moved through the morning mist with the confident stride of someone who had spent a lifetime proving herself worthy of respect through action rather than birthright alone. The Princess Royal's relationship with Gatcombe Park ran deeper than simple ownership. She had purchased the 730-acre estate in 1976 with her first husband, Captain Mark Phillips, using money gifted by her mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Over the decades, she had transformed it into a working farm and equestrian center, personally overseeing every aspect of its operation. The rolling hills and ancient woodlands represented more than property to, and they embodied her vision of meaningful work, sustainable living, and the kind of hands-on involvement that had always set her apart from traditional royal protocols. Her protection officer, Inspector James Morrison, maintained his usual discreet distance of 20 yards as Anne made her way toward the estate's prize-winning dairy operation. At 62, Morrison had served the royal family for over 3 decades, and he understood the princess's need for space during these private moments. Anne's reputation for independence was legendary. She was the first royal to refuse titles for her children, the first to divorce and remarry, and the first to be convicted of a criminal offense when one of her dogs bit 2 children in Windsor Great Park. Her approach to security reflected this same no-nonsense attitude. She wanted protection that allowed her to function normally rather than live in a protective bubble. The estate workers were already beginning their day when Anne approached the main barn complex. Tom Harrison, the head groundskeeper who had worked at Gatcombe for 15 years, waved respectfully as she passed. Their relationship exemplified Anne's management style, professional but warm, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. Harrison later recalled that the princess appeared in excellent spirits that morning, stopping to discuss plans for the winter feed program and expressing satisfaction with the condition of the show jumping course they had recently renovated. Inside the dairy, Anne spent nearly 40 minutes reviewing operations with farm manager Sarah Whitfield. The princess demonstrated her characteristic attention to detail, examining milk production records and discussing concerns about a slight decrease in yield from their prize-winning Holstein herd. Whitfield, who had initially felt intimidated when she began working for the princess 3 years earlier, had grown to appreciate Anne's genuine expertise and practical approach to farming operations. The conversation revealed Anne's deep understanding of agricultural science and animal husbandry, knowledge she had developed through decades of hands-on experience rather than theoretical study. She questioned Whitfield about feed supplements, discussed market prices for organic milk, and reviewed veterinary reports with the thoroughness of a professional farmer. This wasn't ceremonial interest, and genuinely cared about the profitability and sustainability of every aspect of Gatcombe's operation. After leaving the dairy, Anne continued her circuit toward the estate's famous cross-country course, where horses and riders from across the United Kingdom came to train and compete. The course held special significance for her as a former Olympic equestrian who competed in the 1976 Montreal Olympics and understood the technical demands of the sport better than almost anyone. She had designed several of the more challenging jumps herself, applying lessons learned from her own competitive career and years of watching other riders tackle difficult obstacles. The morning sun was beginning to burn through the mist as Anne walked along the course perimeter, mentally noting areas that would need attention before the next major competition. She paused at the notorious Gatcombe Leap, a water complex that had challenged countless riders over the years, including her own daughter Zara, who had gone on to win Olympic silver in equestrian eventing. Standing there, Anne reflected on the continuity of tradition and the satisfaction of watching the next generation exceed her own achievements. Her phone buzzed with the first of what would be dozens of calls and messages throughout the day. Anne's schedule as Princess Royal included patronages of over 300 organizations, from Save the Children Fund, where she served as president for decades, to the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, the British Olympic Association, and countless agricultural and maritime charities. Each organization required regular attention and prided herself on being more than a ceremonial figurehead. The first call came from her private secretary, alerting her to a schedule change for the following week's visit to a maritime training facility in Portsmouth. As she discussed logistics and continued walking, her years of experience allowing her to multitask efficiently while maintaining awareness of her surroundings. Inspector Morrison noted later that she seemed energetic and engaged, showing no signs of the fatigue that would soon become a concern. By 7:15 a.m., and had completed nearly 2 miles of walking across varied terrain. Her route took her past the estate's organic vegetable gardens, where she had personally implemented sustainable growing practices that served as a model for other agricultural operations. The princess had always been ahead of environmental trends, embracing organic methods and renewable energy long before they became fashionable among the general public. The garden showcased Anne's practical approach to environmentalism. Every decision was based on scientific evidence and measurable results rather than political fashion. Solar panels installed in 2018 provided significant portions of the estate's energy needs, while a sophisticated rainwater collection system irrigated the gardens during dry periods. Composting programs turned organic waste into valuable fertilizer, and carefully planned crop rotation maintained soil health without chemical additives. Anne's environmental consciousness extended beyond her private estate. Through her role as president of the Royal Environmental Protection Group, she had championed practical conservation measures across the Commonwealth. Her speeches on environmental topics were notable for their focus on actionable solutions rather than abstract principles, reflecting her belief that meaningful change required specific, measurable commitments rather than good intentions alone. As she approached the estate's famous rose garden, Anne's pace began to slow slightly. The garden represented one of her most personal projects, a carefully curated collection of heritage varieties chosen for their historical significance and natural beauty rather than commercial appeal. Many of the roses dated back centuries, their genetic lines preserved through careful cultivation and selective breeding programs that Anne had supported through partnerships with the Royal Horticultural Society. Inspector Morrison, maintaining his professional vigilance, noticed the subtle change in the princess's movement but attributed it to her natural tendency to pause and examine areas of particular interest. Anne had always been a careful observer, someone who noticed details that others missed and who took time to properly evaluate situations before making decisions. The rose garden held deep emotional significance for and beyond its botanical value. She had planted the first specimens shortly after moving to Gatcombe, during a period when her marriage to Captain Phillips was beginning to show signs of strain. The patient work of nurturing delicate plants through changing seasons had provided a form of meditation and stress relief that proved invaluable during difficult personal times. Over the years, the garden had become a place where Anne could find perspective on the challenges of royal life. The cyclical nature of the roses, their dramatic blooms followed by dormant periods and eventual renewal, offered lessons about resilience and the importance of deep roots during challenging times. She had often brought visiting dignitaries here, using the peaceful setting to conduct informal conversations that proved more productive than formal meeting rooms. As she bent to examine a particularly magnificent specimen of Rosa gallica, one of the garden's oldest varieties, and felt a momentary dizziness that she initially dismissed as the result of changing position too quickly. At her age, such minor physical inconveniences were common and rarely significant. She straightened slowly, taking a deep breath of the cool morning air and focusing on the detailed examination of the rose's late-season blooms. The Rosa gallica held special meaning for Anne. It was known as the royal rose and had been cultivated in monastery gardens since medieval times. Its deep red petals and powerful fragrance represented the endurance of tradition and the beauty that could emerge from careful tending over long periods. As she touched the velvety petals and felt a connection to centuries of gardeners who had found similar satisfaction in nurturing these remarkable plants. But, as she stepped back to admire the overall composition of the garden, the dizziness returned with greater intensity. This time, Anne recognized it as something more serious than simple positional vertigo. Her years of experience with horses had taught her to pay attention to subtle physical warnings. Riders who ignored early signs of fatigue or imbalance often found themselves in dangerous situations. Inspector Morrison, trained to observe even minor changes in behavior, noticed the princess pause longer than usual and reach out to steady herself against a garden bench. His years of experience had taught him to distinguish between normal pauses and moments that might indicate developing problems. Something in Anne's posture triggered his professional instincts, though he maintained his respectful distance while increasing his level of alertness. The morning that had begun with such promise was beginning to take an unexpected turn, though neither the Princess Royal nor her protection officer could have predicted the dramatic events that would unfold in the hours ahead. In the peaceful setting of the rose garden, surrounded by the beauty she had created through decades of patient work, Princess Anne was about to face the kind of challenge that would test not only her personal strength but also the resilience of the institution she had served so faithfully throughout her remarkable life. The sensation began as a subtle weakness in Anne's left leg, similar to the muscle fatigue she might experience after a particularly demanding ride. As someone who had spent decades maintaining peak physical condition for Olympic-level equestrian competition, she possessed an acute awareness of her body's normal responses to exertion. This felt different, not the honest fatigue that came from hard work, but something more concerning and unfamiliar. Inspector Morrison watched with growing unease as the Princess Royal gripped the ornate iron bench more firmly. Her knuckles showed white against the dark metal, and her normally perfect posture had developed a slight forward lean that suggested she was fighting to maintain balance. In his 30 years of royal protection, Morrison had learned to read the subtle signs that might indicate developing problems, and every instinct now screamed that something was seriously wrong. Anne attempted to continue her walk, determined not to let physical discomfort interfere with her morning routine. Independence had always been her hallmark. She was the royal who carried her own luggage, drove her own car, and refused to let protocol prevent her from living as normally as possible. The idea of calling for help over what might be temporary weakness went against every fiber of her character. But, as she took her first step away from the bench, her left leg buckled without warning. Only her tight grip on the iron armrest prevented a complete fall, though the sudden movement sent a shock of alarm through Inspector Morrison. He immediately began moving closer while reaching for his radio, torn between his duty to respect the princess's privacy and his responsibility for her safety. The morning air seemed to grow heavier as Anne struggled to understand what was happening to her body. The weakness was spreading, creating a numbness that reminded her of the sensation after sitting in an uncomfortable position for too long, except this hadn't been preceded by any obvious cause. Her mind, sharp as ever despite her physical distress, began cataloging symptoms with the methodical approach that had served her well in countless challenging situations. She tried to speak, intending to reassure Inspector Morrison that she was experiencing nothing more than a momentary dizzy spell. Instead, the words emerged slurred and unclear, as if her tongue had become too thick for her mouth. The realization that she was losing control over basic functions sent a jolt of fear through her, not for herself, but for the implications of what this might mean for her family and her duties. Morrison's training took over completely as he witnessed the princess's attempted communication. Royal protection officers received extensive medical training precisely for situations like this, and the combination of balance problems, weakness, and speech difficulties pointed toward a serious neurological event. He spoke rapidly into his radio, summoning immediate medical assistance while moving to Anne's side with the gentle authority that emergency situations demanded. The estate's medical response had been planned and rehearsed many times, though everyone had hoped it would never be needed. Dr. Sarah Pemberton, a respected general practitioner who served as the estate's on-call physician, lived only 8 minutes away in the village of Minchinhampton. She had been briefed on potential scenarios involving the Princess Royal and maintained immediate access to specialized emergency equipment that most country doctors never needed to consider. Anne's first clear thought as Morrison's strong hands helped guide her to sit fully on the bench was about the implications for her upcoming schedule. She was due in London that afternoon for a private meeting with representatives from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, followed by an evening reception for the Royal National Mission to deep-sea fishermen. The idea that she might not be able to fulfill these commitments was almost as distressing as her physical symptoms. The princess had built her reputation on absolute reliability. In 40 years of royal duties, she had never cancelled an engagement due to personal illness. Even when she had been kicked in the head by a horse in 1976, resulting in a concussion, she had returned to public duties within days. The work ethic that made her the hardest working royal also made it nearly impossible for her to accept that her body might need time to heal. Morrison's radio crackled with rapid responses as the estate's emergency protocols activated. Tom Harrison, the groundskeeper, was redirecting staff to ensure clear access for medical vehicles. Sarah Whitfield was calling Anne's personal staff to alert them of a developing situation. The estate's small but efficient team moved with the coordinated precision that reflected their respect for the princess and their understanding of the seriousness of any threat to her well-being. Dr. Pemberton's voice came through Morrison's earpiece, calm but urgent as she requested specific information about the princess's condition. Her questions were designed to help her prepare appropriate treatment while en route. She needed to know about consciousness level, ability to move, speech clarity, and any signs of breathing difficulties. Morrison answered with the clinical precision his training had provided, though his voice carried the emotional weight of watching someone he deeply respected struggle with forces beyond her control. Anne's mind drifted momentarily to her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and the phone call that would inevitably follow news of this incident. At 97, the Queen had already endured more family health scares than any parent should face. The thought of causing additional worry to her mother, particularly given the Queen's own recent health challenges, added an emotional dimension to Anne's physical distress that threatened to overwhelm her usual stoic demeanor. The sound of approaching emergency vehicles could be heard in the distance, their sirens creating an surreal contrast to the peaceful morning atmosphere that had prevailed just minutes earlier. Anne attempted to focus on breathing steadily, applying lessons learned from decades of managing pre-competition nerves and high-pressure situations. The controlled breathing techniques that had served her well before Olympic events now became tools for maintaining consciousness during a medical crisis. Dr. Pemberton arrived with the efficiency of someone accustomed to rural emergencies where rapid response could mean the difference between recovery and tragedy. Her first assessment confirmed Morrison's fears. The princess was experiencing what appeared to be a significant neurological event that required immediate hospital evaluation. The combination of motor weakness, speech difficulties, and altered consciousness suggested either a stroke or a similar serious condition requiring specialized treatment. The decision to transport into hospital represented a complex balancing act between medical necessity and royal protocol. Any emergency involving a senior royal triggered automatic security procedures, communication protocols with Buckingham Palace, and coordination with multiple agencies responsible for royal protection. Dr. Pemberton found herself making medical decisions that would have implications far beyond her patient's immediate health. Anne's awareness flickered between moments of clarity and periods of confusion that frightened her more than any physical challenge she had ever faced. During her competitive riding career, she had suffered broken bones, concussions, and various injuries that were simply part of the sport's risk profile. Those challenges had been concrete and manageable pain that would heal, bones that would mend, skills that could be rebuilt through practice and determination. This was different. The loss of control over basic functions like speech and movement struck at the foundation of her identity as someone who had always been completely self-reliant. The Princess Royal had built her life around the principle that preparation, hard work, and personal responsibility could overcome almost any challenge. Finding herself dependent on others for basic communication and mobility forced her to confront vulnerability she had never previously acknowledged. Dr. Pemberton's preliminary examination revealed blood pressure readings that were significantly elevated from Anne's normal levels, though whether this was a cause or result of her current condition remained unclear. The princess's medical history was remarkably clean for someone her age: no significant heart problems, no diabetes, no previous neurological issues. Her physical fitness, maintained through decades of riding and active farming, had always been a source of pride and a foundation for her demanding schedule. The irony wasn't lost on Anne that her collapse had occurred in the rose garden that represented so much of her personal philosophy about patient cultivation and long-term growth. The roses that surrounded her had survived countless storms, periods of dormancy, and the inevitable challenges that came with changing seasons. They endured by maintaining strong root systems and accepting that some periods required rest and restoration rather than constant blooming. As the medical team prepared for transport to the Royal United Hospital in Bath, and managed to communicate one clear concern to Dr. Pemberton, she wanted to ensure that her family received accurate information about her condition rather than learning about it through media speculation. The princess had spent her entire life managing the balance between public duty and private life, and, even in crisis, she remained focused on protecting those she loved from unnecessary worry or confusion. Morrison coordinated with the hospital's security team to ensure that the princess's arrival would be handled with appropriate discretion while still providing access to the specialized care she needed. The Royal United Hospital had previously treated members of the royal family and maintained protocols for ensuring both medical excellence and privacy protection during high-profile emergencies. The ambulance journey to Bath took 45 minutes through the winding country roads that Anne knew intimately from decades of driving between Gatcombe Park and various royal engagements throughout the region. As the vehicle navigated the familiar landscape, Anne found herself reflecting on the thousands of times she had traveled these same routes while healthy and fully in control of her destiny. The reversal of circumstances created a profound sense of vulnerability that challenged her lifelong assumptions about independence and self-sufficiency. Dr. Pemberton monitored Anne's vital signs throughout the journey, noting gradual improvements in some areas while remaining concerned about others. The princess's speech was becoming slightly clearer, suggesting that whatever had caused her symptoms might be stabilizing rather than progressing. However, the left side weakness persisted, and her blood pressure remained elevated despite medication administered in the ambulance. The medical team's radio communications with the hospital painted a picture of a complex case requiring immediate attention from specialists in neurology, cardiology, and emergency medicine. Anne's age, overall fitness level, and lack of obvious risk factors made her condition particularly puzzling, requiring comprehensive evaluation to determine both the cause of her symptoms and the appropriate treatment approach. As they approached Bath, and caught glimpses of the city's famous Georgian architecture through the ambulance windows, the elegant buildings represented centuries of English history and reminded her of the continuity that had always provided stability during times of personal and national challenge. Her role as Princess Royal connected her to that same historical continuity, and she drew strength from the knowledge that the monarchy had survived countless crises through the resilience of individuals who had faced their own moments of vulnerability with courage and dignity. The Royal United Hospital's emergency department had been quietly alerted to prepare for the arrival of a high-profile patient, though the specific identity remained confidential to all but the senior medical staff. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the hospital's lead neurologist, had been summoned from her home despite the early hour, bringing with her more than 20 years of experience treating complex neurological conditions and a reputation for maintaining absolute discretion during sensitive cases. The ambulance bay doors sealed behind Anne's transport vehicle, ensuring privacy as she was transferred to a specially prepared treatment room. The hospital security team, working in coordination with Inspector Morrison and additional royal protection officers who had arrived during the journey, established a perimeter that balanced medical access needs with the requirement to maintain confidentiality about the princess's condition. Anne's first coherent conversation in over an hour occurred with Dr. Chen, whose calm professionalism and direct communication style appealed to the princess's preference for straightforward information. The neurologist's examination revealed that while Anne's speech had continued to improve, significant weakness remained in her left arm and leg, accompanied by subtle changes in facial muscle control that suggested a serious neurological event requiring immediate imaging studies. The hospital's radiology department had been discreetly prepared for emergency scans, with additional staff called in to ensure rapid processing of results. Dr. Chen explained that they would need to perform both CT and MRI scans to determine whether Anne had suffered a stroke, and if so, whether immediate intervention might help minimize permanent damage. The word stroke hung in the air with devastating implications for someone whose entire identity was built around physical competence and mental sharpness. While medical staff prepared for the diagnostic procedures, Anne found herself confronting fears she had never previously acknowledged. Her greatest terror wasn't death, she had accepted that as an inevitable part of life's cycle, but rather the possibility of becoming a burden to her family or unable to fulfill her royal duties. The Princess Royal had defined herself through action and service, and the thought of being reduced to a ceremonial role or, worse, becoming dependent on others for basic care, represented a fate worse than any physical pain. The secure communication systems activated as news of Anne's condition began to reach the highest levels of the royal establishment. Sir Edward Young, the Queen's private secretary, received the initial briefing while simultaneously coordinating with Buckingham Palace's medical team and the royal communications specialists who would need to manage public information if the situation became known to the media. Every decision carried implications for not only Anne's privacy but also the stability of an institution already managing multiple challenges. Dr. Chen's examination protocols followed international standards for acute neurological evaluation, but her approach was modified by the unique circumstances of treating a patient whose health condition could affect constitutional stability. The Princess Royal held no direct role in succession to the throne, but her position as one of the most active and respected working royals meant that any serious impairment could create significant institutional disruption during an already challenging period for the monarchy. Anne's CT scan results arrived within 30 minutes, revealing what Dr. Chen had suspected: evidence of a cerebrovascular accident affecting the right side of her brain. The stroke appeared to be ischemic rather than hemorrhagic, meaning it was caused by a blocked blood vessel rather than bleeding, which provided more treatment options but still represented a serious medical emergency requiring immediate intervention. The medical team's discussion of treatment options took place in Anne's presence, reflecting her insistence on being fully informed about her condition rather than having decisions made without her input. Despite her speech difficulties, she remained mentally sharp and determined to understand both the immediate risks and long-term implications of her condition. Her questions demonstrated the same analytical approach she brought to evaluating agricultural reports or reviewing charitable organization proposals. Time was critical for effective stroke treatment, with each passing hour reducing the likelihood of full recovery. Dr. Chen explained that Anne was a candidate for thrombolytic therapy medication designed to dissolve the blood clot blocking circulation in her brain, but the treatment carried its own risks, including the possibility of bleeding complications that could prove fatal. The decision required balancing potential benefits against serious risks, complicated by Anne's age and the unknown factors that had triggered her stroke. The princess's medical history provided few clues about underlying risk factors. Her cardiovascular health had always been excellent, maintained through decades of rigorous physical activity and a lifestyle that emphasized practical work over sedentary pursuits. She had never smoked, consumed alcohol only in moderation, and maintained the kind of active routine that typically protected against stroke risk. The apparent randomness of her condition made treatment decisions more complex and prognosis more uncertain. Inspector Morrison maintained his protective role while adapting to the unique challenges of hospital security. Royal protection in medical facilities required coordination with hospital security, management of information flow, and preparation for potential media interest if news of Anne's condition leaked to the press. His experience with previous royal medical emergencies provided valuable perspective, though each situation presented unique challenges requiring flexible response protocols. The first family notifications began reaching their destinations as secure communication systems carried carefully worded messages about Anne's condition. King Charles III, who had maintained a complex but ultimately affectionate relationship with his sister throughout their lives, was briefed while attending a private engagement in Scotland. The news required immediate decisions about whether to continue his scheduled activities or return to be near and during her treatment. Queen Elizabeth II received her briefing from Sir Edward Young in the careful language that had evolved over decades of managing royal medical crises. At her advanced age, the Queen understood the implications of stroke better than many, having witnessed similar conditions affect several close friends and family members over the years. Her concern was both personal and institutional, and had been one of her most reliable supporters and hardest-working family members throughout the challenges of recent years. Anne's children, Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, received their notifications through separate channels coordinated to ensure they heard about their mother's condition from official sources rather than potential media reports. Both had inherited Anne's practical approach to crisis management, but the news of their mother's vulnerability created emotional challenges that tested their ability to maintain the composed public demeanor expected of royal family members. Dr. Chen's team moved with practiced efficiency as they prepared for thrombolytic therapy, though the treatment's effectiveness would depend partly on factors beyond medical control. Anne's physical fitness provided advantages in terms of cardiovascular reserve and overall health status, but stroke recovery was notoriously unpredictable, with outcomes that could range from complete restoration to permanent disability requiring fundamental lifestyle changes. The medication administration began at precisely 11:47 a.m., marking the start of a critical period during which Anne would require continuous monitoring for signs of either improvement or dangerous complications. The thrombolytic drugs worked by attacking the blood clot blocking circulation in her brain, but they also increased bleeding risk throughout her body, creating a delicate balance that required expert medical management and constant vigilance. Anne's response to treatment became the focus of intense medical attention as staff monitored neurological function, vital signs, and laboratory values that could indicate either therapeutic success or developing complications. The princess remained conscious throughout the procedure, though her fatigue was evident as her body fought to recover from the neurological trauma while processing powerful medications designed to restore normal blood flow. The hospital's communication protocols ensured that Anne's medical team could focus entirely on her care while administrative staff managed the complex logistics of treating a high-profile patient. Specialized phone lines handled official inquiries, security teams managed access control, and senior administrators coordinated with royal household staff to address both immediate needs and potential longer-term care requirements if Anne's recovery proved complicated or prolonged. Dr. Chen's cautious optimism was based on early signs that Anne's speech was continuing to improve and some voluntary movement was returning to her affected limbs. However, stroke recovery was measured in days and weeks rather than hours, and the ultimate extent of her neurological restoration wouldn't be clear for some time. The medical team's immediate focus remained on preventing complications while supporting Anne's body's natural healing processes. The princess's room became a carefully controlled environment where medical necessity intersected with royal protocol in ways that challenged both healthcare workers and protection officers, and required constant neurological monitoring while also needing the privacy and security that her status demanded. The solution involved specialized nursing staff with security clearances and modified monitoring equipment that could function effectively without compromising either medical care or confidentiality. Anne's first successful phone conversation occurred near the end of the day, when she was able to speak clearly enough to reassure King Charles that her condition was stabilizing. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but her ability to communicate coherently represented significant progress from the morning's frightening loss of speech function. Dr. Chen cautioned that recovery would likely involve setbacks as well as improvements, but the early signs provided reason for measured optimism. The evening brought a parade of senior medical consultants as the hospital assembled a comprehensive care team to manage Anne's ongoing treatment. Specialists in neurology, cardiology, physical medicine, and rehabilitation met to develop integrated treatment protocols that would address not only her immediate medical needs but also the complex requirements of helping a senior royal return to an active public role. Inspector Morrison's security briefings revealed the extraordinary measures being taken to maintain confidentiality about Anne's condition while preparing for various scenarios that might require public disclosure. The royal communication specialists had drafted multiple versions of potential statements, ranging from brief acknowledgments of a minor health issue to more comprehensive explanations if Anne's condition required extended hospitalization or resulted in permanent limitations affecting her royal duties. As night fell over Bath, Anne found herself confronting a form of vulnerability she had never experienced in her 63 years of remarkably robust health. The stroke had forced her to acknowledge her mortality in ways that competitive writing, despite its inherent dangers, had never required. The knowledge that her brain, the organ that had served her so reliably throughout a lifetime of complex challenges, could malfunction without warning created a profound shift in her understanding of human limitations and the ultimately fragile nature of the capability she had always taken for granted. Dawn on October 16 brought a mixture of hope and uncertainty as medical staff conducted their morning evaluations of Anne's condition. Dr. Chen arrived at 6:30 a.m. to find the princess awake and alert, though clearly frustrated by the physical limitations that continued to affect her left side. The overnight nursing reports indicated stable vital signs and no complications from the thrombolytic therapy, but recovery from stroke was never linear, and each day would bring its own challenges and surprises. Anne's first attempt at walking, supported by physiotherapist Maria Santos, revealed both progress and persistent deficits that would require months of dedicated rehabilitation. Her right side functioned normally, but her left leg remained weak and unsteady, requiring careful support to prevent falls. For someone accustomed to mounting spirited horses and walking miles across challenging terrain, the simple act of moving from bed to chair represented a humbling reminder of how dramatically circumstances could change in a matter of hours. The morning's medical conference included specialists who had been consulting on Anne's case throughout the night, reviewing test results and imaging studies to develop a comprehensive understanding of her neurological damage and recovery prospects. The stroke had affected areas of her brain responsible for motor control and speech coordination, but had spared regions controlling cognitive function, personality, and memory, an outcome that Dr. Chen characterized as fortunate given the potential for much more devastating impairment. King Charles III arrived at the hospital shortly after 9 a.m., having traveled overnight from Scotland to be with his sister during her recovery. Their relationship, complex throughout childhood and shaped by very different approaches to royal duty, had evolved into mutual respect and genuine affection as they both matured into senior royal roles. Charles's presence provided and with emotional support while also ensuring that family decisions about her care would involve someone who understood both her personality and the institutional implications of her condition. The brothers' and sisters' private conversation lasted nearly an hour, conducted in the careful language that royal families had developed for discussing sensitive topics that might have constitutional implications. Anne insisted on being briefed about which of her royal engagements would need to be cancelled or postponed, demonstrating that her sense of duty remained intact despite her physical challenges. Charles found himself in the unusual position of ordering his notoriously independent sister to focus on recovery rather than royal responsibilities. Dr. Chen's morning briefing with the royal family was comprehensive and honest about both Anne's progress and the uncertainties that lay ahead. Stroke recovery was highly individual, with outcomes that could vary dramatically based on factors ranging from the patient's overall health to their motivation for rehabilitation. Anne's excellent physical condition before her stroke provided advantages, but her age and the extent of her initial neurological damage created challenges that would require patience and sustained effort to overcome. The hospital's rehabilitation team began their assessment of Anne's needs, recognizing that their patient's goals extended far beyond basic functional recovery to include the complex physical and cognitive demands of royal duties. Princess Royal responsibilities included reviewing detailed briefing documents, conducting lengthy conversations with officials and dignitaries, and maintaining the stamina for engagements that could last many hours and require extensive travel. Anne's speech therapy session with specialist Jennifer Walsh revealed both encouraging progress and persistent difficulties that would require intensive work to resolve completely. While the princess could communicate clearly about familiar topics, she struggled with complex vocabulary and showed fatigue when attempting longer conversations. For someone whose royal role required articulating detailed positions on agricultural policy, maritime safety, and international development issues, these limitations represented significant professional challenges. The morning's first media inquiry reached the hospital's administrative offices, indicating that rumors about Anne's absence from scheduled engagements were beginning to circulate among royal correspondents. The palace communications team faced delicate decisions about how much information to release publicly while respecting Anne's privacy and avoiding unnecessary alarm about her condition. Previous royal medical crises had demonstrated both the public's genuine concern for royal family members and the media's tendency to speculate wildly when official information was limited. Inspector Morrison coordinated with additional security personnel as the hospital prepared for increased attention from both media and members of the public concerned about Anne's welfare. The Princess Royal's popularity among the British people was genuine and widespread, reflecting decades of unpretentious service and her reputation for treating everyone with equal respect regardless of their social status. Public affection for Anne had grown significantly over the years as people recognized her authentic commitment to her duties and her refusal to seek attention for its own sake. Anne's afternoon physical therapy session provided the most encouraging news of the day as she demonstrated improved control over her left arm and managed several steps with minimal support. Maria Santos, who had worked with stroke patients for over 15 years, noted that Anne's progress was faster than average for patients her age, likely reflecting both her pre-stroke fitness level and her determined approach to rehabilitation challenges. The rehabilitation goals developed for Anne were ambitious but realistic, focusing on restoring the specific capability she would need to resume modified royal duties within a reasonable timeframe. The team understood that their patient would not accept a purely ceremonial role and had always defined herself through active engagement with the organizations she supported, and any recovery plan would need to enable meaningful participation rather than simple attendance at formal events. Late afternoon brought a surprise visitor as Zara Tyndall arrived from her home in Gloucestershire, having rearranged her own professional commitments to be with her mother during this critical period. The relationship between Anne and her daughter reflected many of the same qualities that had characterized Anne's own approach to royal life: practical, unsentimental, and focused on supporting each other through challenges rather than dramatic emotional displays. Zara's presence provided Anne with a different kind of support than she received from other family members. As someone who had followed her mother into Olympic-level equestrian competition, Zara understood the psychological challenges of recovering from serious physical setbacks. Her own experience with sporting injuries and the mental discipline required for rehabilitation offered insights that proved valuable during Anne's moments of frustration with her slow progress. The evening's medical rounds revealed that Anne's blood pressure had stabilized at more normal levels, suggesting that her cardiovascular system was adapting well to her stroke treatment. Dr. Chen remained cautious about long-term prognosis, but the absence of secondary complications during the first 48 hours represented an important milestone in Anne's recovery process. Anne's evening phone calls to key staff members at several of her most important charitable patronages demonstrated both her continuing mental acuity and her determination to maintain connection with the work that had always provided her greatest satisfaction. Her conversation with the chief executive of Save the Children Fund lasted 20 minutes and covered detailed questions about upcoming projects in East Africa, revealing that her cognitive abilities remained sharp despite her physical limitations. The hospital's evening security briefing indicated that media interest was intensifying as Anne's absence from scheduled events became more noticeable. Royal correspondents were beginning to ask direct questions about her health, and the palace communications team knew that some form of public statement would soon become necessary to prevent speculation from becoming more disruptive than factual information. Anne's reflection on her first full day as a stroke patient involved coming to terms with limitations that challenged her fundamental assumptions about her own capabilities. The princess had spent her entire adult life solving problems through determination and hard work, confident that sufficient effort could overcome most obstacles. Stroke recovery, however, followed biological timelines that couldn't be accelerated through willpower alone, requiring a form of patience that went against her natural instincts. Dr. Chen's evening assessment noted that Anne was experiencing the psychological challenges that affected most stroke patients as they confronted the gap between their pre-illness capabilities and their current limitations. The medical team had expected this reaction, particularly from someone whose identity was so closely tied to physical competence and professional effectiveness. Managing Anne's emotional adjustment would prove as important as addressing her neurological deficits. The night brought Anne's most honest conversation with herself about the possible implications of her stroke for her future role as Princess Royal. While she remained optimistic about recovery, she also recognized the need to consider scenarios where her capabilities might be permanently reduced. The thought of scaling back her royal duties was emotionally difficult, but her practical nature demanded realistic planning for various outcomes. Inspector Morrison's overnight security arrangements reflected the continuing need to balance Anne's medical requirements with the security protocols that governed royal family protection. The hospital had proven remarkably adaptable to these unique needs, but the situation highlighted the complex logistics involved in providing appropriate care for senior royals during serious medical emergencies. The second night of Anne's hospitalization brought the deep quiet that hospitals achieve in the early morning hours, when the urgency of daytime medical activity gives way to the steady vigilance of night shift monitoring. Anne found herself awake during these quiet hours, processing the dramatic changes that 48 hours had brought to her life and beginning to develop the mental framework she would need for whatever challenges lay ahead. Her thoughts returned frequently to the rose garden at Gatcombe Park, where this crisis had begun among plants that had survived countless seasonal cycles through the strength of their root systems and their ability to adapt to changing conditions. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Recovery would require developing new forms of resilience while drawing on the deep foundations of character and purpose that had sustained her through previous challenges. As she dozed fitfully through her second hospital night, and was already beginning to formulate the approach she would take to rehabilitation and eventual return to royal duties. The process would be longer and more difficult than anything she had previously faced, but it would also provide an opportunity to demonstrate the same qualities of determination and grace under pressure that had defined her approach to every significant challenge in her remarkable life. The third morning brought the moment everyone had been anticipating and dreading in equal measure: the palace's first official statement about Princess Anne's condition. Drafted after extensive consultation between royal communications specialists and herself and her medical team, the statement struck a careful balance between acknowledging the seriousness of her situation and providing reassurance about her recovery prospects. The announcement, released at precisely 9 a.m. through all official royal channels, confirmed that Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal was admitted to hospital on Tuesday following a medical incident at her Gloucestershire home. The princess is receiving excellent care and is making good progress in her recovery. Her Royal Highness extends her gratitude to the medical teams caring for her and appreciates the many kind messages of concern she has received. The measured language of the statement reflected careful consideration of multiple audiences: the British public, who had genuine affection for Anne and deserved accurate information about her condition; the international community, including Commonwealth nations where Anne's regular visits had built strong personal relationships; and the organizations and charities that depended on her active leadership and would need to adjust their operations during her recovery period. Dr. Chen's morning assessment revealed continuing improvement in Anne's speech clarity and coordination, though significant challenges remained with her left side motor function. The neurologist's experience with stroke patients had taught her that recovery often occurred in unexpected patterns, with patients sometimes regaining capabilities they had lost while discovering new limitations they hadn't initially recognized. Anne's case was following this typical pattern of gradual, uneven progress punctuated by both encouraging breakthroughs and frustrating setbacks. The public response to the palace announcement exceeded all expectations, with thousands of messages arriving at Buckingham Palace, Gatcombe Park, and the Royal United Hospital within hours of the statement's release. The outpouring reflected Anne's unique position in public affection. She was respected for her work ethic, admired for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties, and appreciated for her genuine engagement with the people and organizations she served. Anne's first meeting with occupational therapist David Kumar focused on assessing her capacity for the specific tasks that royal duties would require. Kumar's evaluation went far beyond basic activities of daily living to include capabilities like reviewing complex documents, participating in lengthy meetings, and maintaining focus during extended public engagements. The assessment revealed that while Anne's cognitive abilities remained largely intact, her physical stamina and fine motor control would require significant improvement before she could resume her normal schedule. The morning's physiotherapy session with Maria Santos produced the most encouraging development yet and managed to walk 50 feet with minimal assistance, demonstrating that her brain was successfully rebuilding the neural pathways damaged by her stroke. The achievement was modest by normal standards but represented a significant milestone for someone who had been unable to stand unsupported just 3 days earlier. King Charles's second visit to the hospital included a private meeting with Dr. Chen to discuss long-term care planning and the realistic timeline for Anne's return to royal duties. The conversation was frank about the uncertainties involved in stroke recovery and the need to balance Anne's determination to resume full activities with medical realities that might require permanent modifications to her role and responsibilities. The afternoon brought Anne's first substantive conversation with her private secretary, Commander Timothy Lawrence, whom she had married in 1992, about the practical implications of her condition for the dozens of organizations that relied on her active leadership. The discussion was emotionally difficult but necessary, as they reviewed which commitments could be postponed, which required substitute representation, and which might need to be permanently transferred to other royal family members. Anne's insistence on being directly involved in these decisions reflected her lifelong approach to leadership. She had never been content with ceremonial roles and was determined to maintain meaningful engagement with her organizations even if her capacity was reduced. The conversation revealed both her realistic assessment of her current limitations and her unwavering commitment to the people and causes she had served for decades. The hospital's afternoon security briefing addressed increasing media presence outside the facility as news of Anne's stroke spread through official and unofficial channels. While the initial public response had been overwhelmingly supportive and respectful, the protection team needed to prepare for the possibility of more intrusive coverage as the story developed and Anne's eventual discharge from hospital approached. Anne's evening speech therapy session with Jennifer Walsh produced breakthrough moments that provided hope for more complete recovery of her communication abilities. The princess was able to discuss complex policy issues related to agricultural development in developing countries, demonstrating that her intellectual capabilities and extensive knowledge remained accessible despite the neurological challenges she continued to face. The day's most significant development came during Anne's dinner conversation with Sarah, when she was able to speak clearly and coherently for over an hour without the fatigue that had previously limited her verbal interactions. The improvement suggested that her brain was adapting more quickly than initially expected, though Dr. Chen cautioned that recovery progress was rarely linear and setbacks remained possible. Anne's reflection on her first week as a stroke survivor led to important insights about the assumptions she had always made about health, aging, and the inevitability of physical decline. At 63, she had expected gradual changes over time but hadn't prepared for the possibility of sudden, dramatic alterations to her capabilities. The experience was teaching her about the importance of adaptability and the need to find meaning and purpose even when circumstances changed unexpectedly. The evening brought news that arrangements were being made for Anne's transfer to a specialized rehabilitation facility where she could receive intensive therapy while maintaining the security and privacy requirements of her royal status. The move would represent both progress in her recovery and acknowledgement that returning to full function would require weeks or months of dedicated effort rather than the quick recovery she had initially hoped to achieve. Dr. Chen's evening consultation included discussion of the specialized rehabilitation program that had been designed specifically for Anne's needs and goals. The program would address not only her physical deficits but also the complex cognitive and emotional challenges involved in returning to high-level professional responsibilities after a serious medical event. The approach recognized that Anne's recovery goals extended far beyond basic functional independence to include the sophisticated capabilities required for effective royal service. Anne's conversation with Queen Elizabeth II that evening was their first direct communication since the stroke, conducted via secure video link that allowed the Queen to see for herself that her daughter was alert and recovering. The conversation was brief but emotionally significant for both women, providing reassurance that Anne's essential personality and mental acuity remained intact despite her physical challenges. The night brought Anne's most honest assessment of how her stroke might ultimately change her approach to royal duties and personal life. While she remained determined to recover as fully as possible, she also recognized that the experience had provided valuable perspective on the importance of sustainability and the need to balance service to others with care for her own well-being. Inspector Morrison's security planning for Anne's eventual discharge from hospital reflected the complex logistics involved in managing a high-profile medical recovery while maintaining both privacy and accessibility for the rehabilitation work that lay ahead. The solutions would require coordination between multiple agencies and facilities, all working to support Anne's recovery while protecting her from unwanted attention during a vulnerable period. As Anne settled into her fourth hospital night, her thoughts turned to the future and the work that lay ahead in rebuilding the capabilities she would need to resume meaningful royal service. The stroke had interrupted her life dramatically, but it had also demonstrated the strength of the relationships and institutions she had built over decades of dedicated service. The support she was receiving from family, friends, medical professionals, and the general public provided a foundation for recovery that extended far beyond individual determination to include the collective goodwill of a nation that had come to recognize her genuine dedication to service above self. The week's events had transformed Anne from someone who had never seriously considered her own vulnerability into a person who understood both the fragility and resilience of human capability. The lessons were painful but valuable, and she was already beginning to see how her experience might inform and enhance her future service to the organizations and people who had always been the focus of her royal work. The road ahead would be longer and more challenging than any she had previously traveled, but it would also provide opportunities for growth and understanding that would ultimately make her a more effective and empathetic leader.